Welcome to Interaction Design Module 2 Tutorial 4. What are we going to be working on today? Before we jump in and start talking about our topic, we're going to talk about text editors. It has become a bit of an issue this week, and we wanted to just talk about some of the issues people might be encountering. There are several options for text editors. We had covered several of them last term. Not all of them are working for people, right? If one of the ones we're suggesting doesn't work for you, be prepared to test and find the one that is. You might also be encountering some in different classes, and absolutely use the one that's going to be working best for you. You will find through this lecture, though, some of them are not working for people, and you're going to want to be able to be agile, respond, and make a change. The most important thing in any text editor that you're using is that it has to be able to serve the content in a browser, right? This mini server or test server environment is what allows you to debug problems in web deployment. Otherwise, you basically write things in your text editor, your code, and you can't actually see what it's going to look like. That's not always perfect. It isn't always accurate, but it is necessary. Google Chrome has become the standard still for testing in browsers. But full debugging would also include testing your project on different browsers on different devices. The three main types of text editors you're going to encounter are local text editors, cloud text editors, and server text editors. So your local text editor is going to be something you download. It's an app. It uses files directly on your machine, and it will auto-launch a browser window when you go to like a live server type of situation. A cloud base is going to be in the web, and you may need an account to run it. You may not, usually you do. All of your content and your files are then uploaded to a separate server that's run by this cloud-based system. Your files may or may not be publicly accessible at that point. If it's an actual full server, like our Sheridan Phoenix or Firebird servers, it is like a private server, right? So even when you get your own, and you may already have your own web page, you may already have to manage your own server files. But it is a separate server. It is a publicly accessible server. You would need to have a password access, and only you would have access to that server. But it is important to recognize that the URL becomes publicly accessible. So what are some of the pros and cons of these? So a local server, it's easy to control your files and your assets. They're on your computer. Everything is private. The con with that would also be that locally served content does not reflect web conditions, and things that'll work in brackets or in Visual Studio Code do not always mean it's going to work the same way once you actually get it on your server. So it's a good way to test that your code isn't initially broken, but it does not actually reflect what other things you might have to change once it is uploaded to a server. Cloud. Well, so a pro is that it's really easy to share or collaborate. You can even have some of them that are made specifically to collaborate, like Replit, where multiple people can work on one piece of code and overcome problems with it. It may reflect closer to real web conditions because of that. It's already on the web. A con, though, is that it's proprietary, right? It's really specific. It's like specific software that way. And it may not support, and it could even block full web functionality. What about on your actual server, uploading your code and editing it there? Testing is live, right? Which is great because the debugging is real. And if it works there, it works for sure. The cons with that are that it's live. It's not a test. Your files are public, and so are your errors. And a big one is that live servers, even though they reflect instant changes when you save your file, your browser cache, when you're running it live, is different, and it saves web pages for efficiency. If you think about how quickly you can reload a web page, The first time you go there, it may be slow, and the second time it's a bit quicker because it's already saved the web page. So if you don't, oh, and I've spelt that, flush your cache, right? If you don't flush your cache, it means that you could actually be looking at a different version of the web page, an older version. So you make a change, you look at the web page, nothing happens. And the reason for that is that you need to actually be flushing the cache, or it's reloading that older version for efficiency. You just need to work that into your workflow. It is still a con, but it is not necessarily a deal breaker. What are some examples of these? So local text editors. Brackets, which is the one that we had used for many years. We've moved, many of us have moved to Visual Studio Code, not entirely. Atom is another great one. You might be using Xcode depending on what you're doing. In the cloud, probably the two most obvious ones would be Replit and GitHub. There are many more. I'm just sort of giving you the top ones that we've been using recently. For your actual server, you would probably, and many of you are using CyberDuck to move your files from your local machine to your server already, but you could be using cPanel, and in fact I use cPanel, which is the default way of moving your files to the Sheridan servers. What are some text editor example considerations? So with brackets, it's not supported anymore. So even though it's available, it may not work for you. Visual Studio Code has issues with the live server. It seems to be mostly on the Mac side and only for some OSs, but even that is not specific. And what happens is when you try to launch the server, when you try to do the live server, the plugin that you have to install the extension, nothing will happen. It will tell you that the server has started. It won't actually have launched it. And the solution for that is a solution, but it will seem like it doesn't work. Atom needs plugins to launch the server, which is not a big deal. And if you prefer Atom, Atom is an option. Xcode is something that a lot of you may not even really be aware of. It's really specific for iOS and OS X development only. If you're doing cloud, Replit has problems. So for instance, this project we're working on is audio. Replit has no web audio, so it won't actually access the microphone. There are some workarounds for that, but they're in beta. GitHub is great, except you really need to configure it for it to work well for you. Yeah, you could just use it, but out of the box, to get it to work with your server and to connect to everything and then load it in the page, needs some configuration for that to work properly. And both CyberDuck and cPanel are going to at some point require flushing your cache, and you may not realize that that's the problem and you think there's something wrong with your code. So if you don't have that as a regular part of your workflow, it can fool you into thinking that your code isn't working when in fact it's working just fine. You're just still looking at an older broken version. So I'm hoping that those give you some ideas of things that you might be encountering, reasons why you might choose one over another. For this tutorial, I've had to give this a lot of thought. I'm going to still be using Visual Studio Code. And the reason for that is that I'm running this on my PC. It's working really well for me. I've made the transition from Visual Studio to Brackets, and I'm still enjoying that experience. I am starting to use Brackets again, though, a bit because I'm not super thrilled with the problems that I've been encountering when I try to run the same things on my Mac. And to be clear, the code that we're working with today is not working on my MacBook. All right? And when I say that, I shouldn't say that. It's not quite accurate. On my MacBook, Visual Studio Code is not launching the live server. And the workaround for that is specific, that I need to open my browser, manually, and I need to type in the local server address manually. And when I do that, it's working fine. So the server is launching. It's not auto-launching the browser with the right address already in it. That's really the problem that's happening. So because of that, I've been thinking of going to brackets again. I have used Atom a little bit. It's not at the top of my list, but I do understand when people really like it, they do like it. Xcode is mostly used when I'm trying to build some kind of an app for iOS or OS X. So we've used it for Unity when we're running apps in like augmented reality apps that you need to work on an iPhone. You need Xcode to do that. Replit, I was really hoping was going to be the solution for the Visual Studio Code problem. But without web audio, it means that the sound, P5 sound, P5 speech, none of them work. So it's no longer an option. GitHub is a solution that I think is actually the most interesting, but until we have a great guide to just get it set up and use it, it's still something we're encouraging you guys to be setting up, but we don't have like a good system set up to guide you through that whole process. If another class has already done that and you have GitHub set up and you want to go in that direction, please do that. If I end up showing you an example using cPanel, which I might even be able to show you then how the requirement of the flushing the cache works. That was sort of the solution I had gone to. And I will also be clear that there comes a point with your local files, with your cloud files, that you need to move them to your server to test them, because what you've been looking at is not exactly accurate, and you need to get the console open and look for the errors that you're only going to get in the web anyway. So there comes a point where you really are having to move your debugging to the server. Now, let's move on and take a look at what we're going to be doing today, the fun stuff. We're going to be starting to look at P5 speech library, which is different than the sound library. P5 speech allows for us to synthesize, identify, and approximate human voices. So what does that mean? It means that P5 actually uses the web, and I'm pretty sure it's the Google web voice that are available, and they're available in all sorts of different dialects, languages, and it's a powerful tool, and P5 connects right to it. That means that we can give text to P5 and it will speak back to us. It also means that we can use our own voice and give P5 commands, right? Or have it do audio visualizations of what it thinks we're saying. So that's also really interesting. And we can actually also then, as we kind of move on in the way we're going to be experimenting with P5, we're going to be looking at machine learning. So P5 is a really powerful tool for us to play with this, especially for designers. So it's a powerful design, and in this case also accessibility tool for creating interactive generative projects that interact directly through voice. Let's take a quick look at the P5 speech library. And what I just want to kind of bring to your attention is that, because you notice that this is not necessarily, and specifically, this is not on the p5.js website. So if we go to p5.js and we open it up and we go to libraries and then we scroll down to, there's our sound that we were working with last week. Scroll down, scroll down, scroll down, scroll down, and we get to P5 speech. And if I click that, you see that it takes me to the exact same place. So you'll notice that this is not on the P5 website, okay? But if we go back there for a quick second, you'll see that it gives a great explanation. P5 speech provides simple, clear access to the web speech and speech recognition APIs, allowing for the easy creation of sketches that can talk and listen, and it's created by R. Luc Dubois. So if we come here, you can see there's, you can download, right? So you can view the project on GitHub, you can download different parts of it. So this was done at New York University, Tandon School of Engineering. They worked on this, and So it's even though it's using P5, it is running on their website, right? Like just getting the information. It gives you the download for the library to include it. It gives you the full link, which is great. There are some examples here of how to write some of the code. So if you want to come in here, right, and look at more examples, right, because these are great, right, speech box, all this, we're only going to be doing a small portion of these things. So in fact, I encourage you to follow the link, come to the website, and dig in through your form storming as we go further. So for our P5 speech form storming, so each of the tutorials we're going to be doing this activity experiments with a specific way that P5 explores this speech library. So our week 6 has 3 video tutorials. The first one is text to voice, the second one is voice to text, and the third one is using machine learning audio. This tutorial is going to be exploring how to create synthesized voice from text in the browser. Let's take a look at some code. So like I mentioned, I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code, and I've got my first one loaded here. And before we start with there, let me just make sure that everybody is aware of where you can get that. The code, of course, is going to be provided, and you're going to find that there are module 2 tutorial 4, module 2 tutorial 5, module 2 tutorial 6, and we're going to be starting off with module 2 tutorial 4, and it's going to be the P5 text to speech, and I've dragged this text to speech in my Visual Studio Code, and that's what you're looking at right here. I'm going to also pull up my browser window and just collapse it there so we can kind of have it in the background. We don't really need those anymore. Leave that there. Okay. So let's take a look at this code. So you can see that we have our index, and you know what? I'm just going to stretch this out a little tiny bit while we chat about it. Keep the meta. This is stuff that actually works well with iOS, so it may not be necessary for everybody, but it'll be helpful for if you decide to test this in an iPhone. You can see that we're running our CSS just right here mostly. In our scripts, you can see that we are running those links. We have no libraries that we've downloaded. Everything is online. You can see that we have our p5.min, we have our p5dom.min, we have our p5 sound.min, and we have our p5 speech.js. For now, oh, and you know what? I'm going to move that to sketch.js. And you can see that in the body, I've actually commented out some text, and we don't really need this text. I've left it there. It's part of the demo that this originally came from. Full disclosure, this source code came from a Dan Schiffman coding train tutorial type demo, and then I've just gone in and played with it and figured it all out, and then I'm bringing that to you. Made some changes with it, had some fun with it, and then I'm bringing that to you guys. And we're going to actually be starting then with our sketch.js. And so let's talk a little bit about this. You can see we have a variable called talk, and I don't know if that's, I'm going to leave it var for now, but I have no problem trying that with let, making sure that'll work okay. That's the only variable we're starting off with. You can see that in our setup, and we're using all arrow functions. So we have our create canvas, and you know what? I'm actually going to change that display width. Whoops. Display height. You can see now we've declared the variable. We're now defining the variable, and we're turning it into a new p5.speech. So this will be a speech object. And then you can see we have talk.onload equals voices loaded. Okay, so let's just talk a little tiny bit about what that means. that is loading beyond the default voices that are available using the web speech and speech recognition APIs already have languages loaded into them. And what we want to be doing is we want to be accessing those, right? So specifically this talk.onload voices loaded means that we're going to load voices beyond the default. There is a sort of a default male voice that's there. I don't know if we're going to actually listen to that one, if that's this one in particular. It may even be fun to, for a second. You know what? Actually, let's hear it first. Let's see this work before I go and start breaking it. You can see then in our voices loaded. So it's using this talk.onload voices loaded. So it's basically already calling this, right? So what is voices loaded? And you can see that in fact voices loaded is this function that's right here. And the one thing I've noticed in this, all like right off the top, yes, very clearly, and I don't have that set. That's interesting that I don't, and I'm very curious about playing it a little bit with that, because I would have thought I would have needed to have called it with the brackets in. We're going to try it both ways. But anyway, it's calling this function, and you can see this function is just past the setup, right? And you also notice that there's really nothing in the draw. We probably don't even need that there. But voices loaded is a function, and in this function, it's basically telling us to take this talk variable, right? List voices. Talk.setVoice, and this one is being set to this Google US English. And when we load this up in the browser, this will start to make sense of where we're getting this from. And if you also look, I've got 3 commented out languages, right? So these are different set voices that I have already ready, but there are a bunch of them that you can actually use, and you can change which voice you use. Talk interrupt equals false, and that's important because once you do your mouse pressed, you want it to be able to continue speaking without it being interrupted every time you click the mouse pressed. And then you can see we have this mouse pressed function, which is doing talk.speak, and this is really specific. And I want you to just notice what I have written here. If this is put in the draw function, it will loop over and over and over and over and over, because the draw function loops, right? So right now we have this talk function that's running, right? In our mouse, we have this talk speak command in our mouse pressed function. Let's see what that looks like. Or in a better way of saying that is let's hear what that looks like. So down here in the bottom, you can see that I have the Go Live server plugin running, or the extension, right? So if you're having trouble with this, this would be the part where when you go to click this, nothing happens. And if you do that, so I'm just going to show you when I do run this, it will automatically auto launch. And if we look up here in the browser window, you can see that it's HTTP, which it would be better if that was HTTPS, but I guess we don't need it right now. 127.0.0.1.5501, right? And this is what's happening, is that this is going to be your local address, and this is the specific server address of this that this is running in right now. So
this is put in the draw function, it will loop over and over and over and over and over.
And that's me clicking in the window. Okay? So if you take this address and you load this, and it may be for you maybe 5500, if you load this into your browser, so if you press this server, the server, live server, nothing happens, and you open your browser and you put this address in here, and again it might be 5500 for you, it should load this in the window, and you'll notice like there's nothing there. And so you know what, it may be good just so that you know that when the draw is happening, that something has happened, because otherwise it's just basically happening in a white window and you don't know if it's an error. So by this even loading, you know that there is no error here, right? Now, what we should do though is, first of all, just take a listen one more time.
If this is put in the draw function, it will loop over and over and over and over and over.
So it is reading this. It's reading it from this Google US English. Okay. So for a second, I'm just going to comment that one out, and I'm going to bring this one in, and I'm going to save it. And now it's Microsoft Linda, and it's English, and it's Canada.
If this is put in the draw function, it will loop over and over and over and over and over.
Okay. Then I'm going to try the Google UK English female.
If this is put in the draw function, it will loop over and over and over and over and over.
Okay. And I'm not 100% sure which language this is. It is an Asiatic language, but I'm not sure which one it is, so I'm not going to pretend I do. Let's hear it.
If this is put in the draw function, it will loop over and over and over and over and over.
So it's interesting that it's just using the different sort of dialect. It's not translating this, right? This isn't a translate, which would be a great tool as well. This is just reading this off using some kind of a voice synthesis. So I'm going to go back to the original one.
If this is put in the draw function, it will loop over and over and over and over and over. If this is put in the
Whoops.
draw function, it will loop over and over and over and over and over.
And every time I click, that's going to happen in the window. So if we pull up the console, you see that in fact, because we have this, let me see, do I have it set as, no, it's not even in the console, it's just list voices. So this list voices function, this is what it does. So it's going to, and you can see p5.speech voice is loaded, Microsoft, so it's David, Richard, Linda, Mark, Zira, and then it gives a series of them, right? Dutch, English, English female, English male, and you can go down the list and there's a bunch. Originally it seemed that there was a lot more, and this seems like a bit of a truncated list, but I think it's good enough for what we're doing. So this is one place you can go, and if you want to experiment with any of these, you can come in here and replace any of this, right? But you can see that it is written verbatim. It is exact. The entire with spaces, right? So if we look at the Microsoft Linda English Canada, it's not just writing Linda, right? Microsoft Linda English Canada. So this is the way you would go in if you want to play with this code. Let's close that console. Let's go to index and let's see what happens if we head over to sketch 1. What changes in sketch 1? So you can actually see right at the top that we have a slider. Now this is basically the same slider that, oh, and you know what? Even though I have a second one, I have a second variable there. And which one are we actually executing? We are executing the set pitch. So we probably don't need this one, right? So I'm going to just comment that one out. We have our var talk still. We have our let slider pitch, right? So if you think about the sliders that we were using in the last tutorial when we were playing with sort of that very last microphone input one, this is just taking that exact idea. So we've created a slider variable in our setup. You can see that we still have our talk, and it's calling that function, the voices loaded function, right? Talk.onload equals voices loaded. It's loading the voices that are available. And you can see now that I've got this slider pitch, right? So I'm defining it equals create slider. And I'm giving it some really specific parameters here. And again, we talked about the slider parameters. We're not going to talk about them again right now. If this is new to you, it's probably because you didn't finish the microphone input tutorials, and I suggest you go back and do those before you do this. So the create slider function, you could always look it up at P5 as well. It's running the same exact set of numbers that we were running, I think, on the slider volume. Slider pitch dot position, and this is, in fact, this is not going to run potentially the way it's set there. And I'm gonna, let me just, yeah, no, that we don't need slider pitch dot position right now. In fact, I'm gonna pull that one out. Of this. In fact, you know what? I'm going to pull out the slider rate for now. That's something you can kind of look at after. Right. All right, so again, everything else is the same. We have our same voices. We have our same... if you uncommented this talk.speak right here in the setup, it's actually this simple, that it will load the minute it runs.
What's up?
Right? So because it loads in the setup, it only happens once.
If this is put in the draw function, it will loop over and over and over and over and over.
So you could have something in the setup that will only be said when the web page loads, and then there's something separate happening when you do a mouse pressed. Okay? But let me just uncomment that one. And so this is running that Google English. Now, if you noticed though, it didn't sound the same, did it? Now there's a reason it didn't sound the same, and that comes down to this slider pitch we're talking about. So we again have our mouse pressed function. In our draw though, you can see that we have our talk.setPitch, and the set pitch is set to the slider pitch and its value. This is using exactly the same process. So mechanically, this is the same exact way that it worked when we were looking at the using this process for the microphone input. Okay, I'm just gonna kind of save it in that way. And so if I click that
If this is
up,
put in the draw function, it will loop over and over and over and over and over. If this is put in the draw function, it will loop over and over and over and over and over. If this is put in the draw function, it will loop over and over and over and over and over. If this is put in the draw function, it will loop over and over and over and over and over.
so one thing to
If
notice.
this is put in the draw
Oops.
function, it will loop over and over and over and over and over. If this is put in
See,
the draw function,
every
it will
time
loop over
I've
and over and
moved
over and over and
that,
over. If this is put in the draw function, it will loop over and over and over and over and over.
okay, every time I've moved that slider, it has saved it as another click. So I'm really just wanting to show you, because we're not going to stay here very long, that you have to set it to a specific pitch, and then it will click and it will play in that pitch, but it isn't dynamic. It's not changing, right? So for instance, if I click,
If this is put in the draw function, it will loop over and over and over and over and over. If this is put in the draw function, it will loop over and over and over and over and over. If this is put in the draw function, it will loop over and over and over and over and over.
so it's recognizing those mouse presses and it's responding and changing the pitch every time. Okay, let's head over to sketch 2 and what changes. And so what I've done here is I've gone in and I've added pretty much the same code as the microphone input. You can even see that those two are existing just like this, right? So I've got slider pitch and slider rate. You can see that a lot of this otherwise is running the same way. I'm using the same voice. All of this is identical. Mouse pressed is still the same. It's still running the same words. You can change these words anytime you want. And I suggest you do. Try different words, like a different sentence. And then in the draw function, though, you can see there's a bunch of things. But this is taken directly out of the microphone input, the very last one, the sketch 6, okay? All I've done is I've changed it from volume and rate to pitch and rate. That's all. Now, one of the things, though, is this is not going to work the same way, because I mentioned it's not dynamic the same way, right? It's not playing an audio clip. So what it will do is it will respond differently based on where I click in the window.
If this is put in the draw function, it will loop over and over and over and over and over. If this is put in the draw function, it will loop over and over and over and over and over. If this is put in the draw function, it will loop over and over and over and over and over. If this is put in the draw function, it will loop over and over and over and over.
If this is put in the draw function, it will loop over and over and over and over and over.
So you can see that though moving things did not make any difference. I only left these ellipses in here for effect so that you could kind of get a sense of where you were within this sort of scale of being in this area and this area, but the ellipses are not actually doing anything other than being a little bit of eye candy for the process, but they are not reflective of the audio. And with that, we're going to move back to our slide deck, right? So that's looking at the code. So again, with your P5 speech that are any type of things you're going to upload to your server, any of those examples, you need to make sure that you are including that HTTPS as well. Maybe. I'm not 100% sure if it's going to matter for this tutorial as much. It is going to be imperative for the next one, right? It's still a good thing to get used to of recognizing, though, that there's a difference, and it's an important difference between those two. So what are you supposed to do next? Play. Go in and play with these mechanical ways that you can affect the way the code is going to work. Go in to the P5 speech library, look at some of those other examples, and play with some of those as well. Also, like I mentioned about those ellipses, that they have nothing to do with the actual functionality of the page other than being a indicator, maybe like a bit of a visual cue as to where or what to expect, right? There are potentially very important ways, even perhaps accessibility related ways that you can affect the way the code looks. I encourage you to do that. Follow your curiosity, even if it breaks the code. You can always, download it as you go, and always save versions of it. You notice that is what I do. Sketch 1, sketch 2, however many it takes, and you can easily go into your index and get it to reference the one that you need. You never know when you're going to hit that aha moment. Don't lose that aha moment because you've decided to keep exploring and you lose that piece. Okay? And with that, please go ahead and start form storming.